Adam Johnson, a viewer, has just posted a video in the comments to one of my videos. It's on how Priestley presents both the older and younger generation, a really popular question in exams, and also a great one to revise from because you can adapt this to every single question. Let's jump straight in and see how an examiner would score it. Priestley contrasts the younger generation with the older generation to emphasise the chasm between traditional classist views of 1912 and the more progressive socialist ideas emerging in 1945, which Priestley strongly believed in. So that's a pretty strong thesis statement. In the mark scheme, the examiner is using this first column and they're saying to themselves, is this convincing and critical, or is it thoughtful and developed? And a detailed thesis statement will show you're at least thoughtful and developed. One purpose the play offers is to emphasise the hope Priestley is placing, as well as the hope he wants society to place in the younger generation. SHEILA and Eric are constructed as exemplars for the transformation in society that Priestley envisions, understanding the inspector's lesson for a fairer society following the two world wars. Notice how he's included all this context, not to prove he knows the context, but to back up his interpretation of what Priestley is up to. Notice as well that he's talking about the characters as constructs who are there just to put forward Priestley's point of view. And the other thing that he does is he says these constructs are there to persuade the reader in the form of wider society. So now we definitely have a convincing analysis and it's in the top band. If we come to AO3 in context, we can see that he's starting to explore these ideas and perspectives about the time. The other great job of a thesis like this is it is effectively your essay plan. You know that in the rest of the essay you just have to prove what you've set out here. Paragraph 2. With the arrival of the inspector, the divide between the younger and older generation becomes more apparent, since the younger generation begin to adopt a more liberal mindset and realise the need to take responsibility for their actions. Eric shows signs of discordance with his father, questioning why with higher prices, higher wages should not be given. The repetition of higher perhaps normalises the notion of workers seeking profits and is a natural instinct. Perhaps the repetition of higher in prices and wages connects the desires of the upper class capitalists to the desires of the workers underneath them, uniting the two sectors of society. Notice how Adam is embedding quotations, fitting them within sentences so that they make sense. Notice that he keeps using tentative language. That shows that he's exploring ideas, being exploratory. And notice the fabulous vocabulary that he's using, and you can steal. So if we zoom into AO1, you can see that we now have an exploratory response. In AO2, we definitely have exploration of the effects on the reader. Do we have methods? Many students think that methods have to be metaphors, similes, all that sort of thing. No, you just have to say what the writer is doing, and Adam has shown us it's the repetition. That is the method, and he makes that clear again here. Let's look at paragraph 3. Eric directly acts as Priestley's proxy in this exchange. Now that's another brilliant bit of vocabulary to steal. It means he takes the place of Priestley's point of view. It's his proxy. Since he questions Mr. Birling's decision to sack Eva and gains confidence with the inspector's arrival, as though he understands the purpose the inspector serves. Priestley shows Eric in this positive light, questioning capitalist thinking and ideology in order to deliver his message of how the younger generation need to be trusted in order for Britain to progress as a strengthening liberal nation which develops from the Edwardian restricted society. Ideology is another one of these excellent pieces of vocabulary that you can steal. So this paragraph is all about the effect on the audience, on the reader, which is clearly an exploration, and we're going to argue here, I think, is convincing. And you can see from the length that it is definitely at least developed and thoughtful. So coming back to the writer's intentions all the time, pushes you into bands 5 and 6, which is grades 7, 8 and 9. The next paragraph moves on to SHEILA. SHEILA similarly adopts a socialist mindset and becomes accepting of the inspector's message. In Act 2, SHEILA too begins to understand the inspector's message as she goes close to him wonderingly. The physical movement of SHEILA towards the inspector, away from her parents, reflects her movement ideologically towards socialism, since she distances herself from her parents' ideology, proven to be corrupt by the inspector. Perhaps Priestley constructs SHEILA to be so responsive to change, to act as an exemplar for the ideological transformation he wishes for the audience to undergo, moving away from capitalism towards a socialist alternative provided by the Labour Party in the 1945 elections. In yellow, I've highlighted the vocabulary that shows how easy it is to show the examiner you're using the right subject terminology. In green, we've got the vocabulary that shows what Priestley is up to. What he's up to are his methods, and methods are at the top of the mark scheme, remember. This section of the paragraph all explains the impact of that one quotation. And that's what we mean by a developed response with detail. Then it's just a judgment call by the examiner. How convincing is that? Well, I hope you agree. It's very convincing. Well done, Adam. The next paragraph is unusual in that the quotation comes at the end, and this is another factor. Every paragraph you write needs a quotation in it, otherwise you're just chucking in context for the sake of it. I can't emphasize how important AO3 is in this respect. It's not just the context that gets you the mark, it's linking that context to the ideas and perspectives of the author. So you must link it to an interpretation, and to do that, to get the interpretation, you must link it to a quotation. Let's read. Priestley's play, propagating the notion of a socialist society, was written and performed in 1945, when his desire for a socialist society could be achieved by voting for the new Labour government led by Clement Attlee. Priestley continually presents SHEILA, therefore, in such a positive light, taking accountability and being receptive to change, to highlight the benefits of having a society ruled without restrictions and living under the inspector's message of societies as members of one body. Now, it would have been even better if Adam had mentioned that this was also a Christian reference. It's the language of communion which is important, as at least 80% of his audience would have been regular churchgoers, and marrying the socialist message to the Christian message all the audience already believe in, even the capitalists and conservatives, is a brilliant way to persuade the audience to start thinking of voting for a Labour government. What's the method? Well, Priestley continually presenting SHEILA in a positive light. Remember, it doesn't have to be metaphor, simile, verbs, adjectives, blah-de-blah. Anything the author does. Next, we have some more brilliant vocabulary. Direct antithesis, which means the exact opposite. And again, this is being presented as a method because Priestley creates these characters, SHEILA and Eric, to be the opposites to the older generation. It's a structural technique. The direct antithesis to SHEILA and Eric are the older generation, who are adamant in sticking to their traditionalist classist attitudes. Mr. Birling refused to give Eva Smith the pay rise she desired, and the verb refused is further echoed when Mrs. Birling justifies her actions of denying Eva Smith financial support. The verb refused perhaps suggests both characters had the opportunity to help the suffering working class with their wealth and influence, but chose not to. Now, you might be thinking that verb is the method, but it's not. The echoing is the method. It's giving this language refused to Birling, and then towards the end of the play, giving it to SYBIL, showing how both members of the older generation are responsible for Eva's death and the oppression of the working classes which her death represents. Priestley, as a result, portrays these two characters as selfish and flawed. Mr. Birling is associated with capitalism since he owns his own business, and by attacking his decision and his lack of accountability throughout the play, Priestley is undermining capitalism as impeding societal development. So another great bit of context linked to the author's purpose, and it gives us some vocabulary, in fact a sentence that you can actually steal. You can put this very sentence in any Inspector Calls essay. It's not plagiarism. Steal it, whap it in, because it automatically gives you convincing and critical exploration of ideas and vocabulary. Next, Adam has a paragraph which is absolutely full of methods, where the characters are again presented as constructs. Now he's going to introduce the idea of the structure of the play. That is a sophisticated idea that most students won't bother putting in. And then there's some nifty vocabulary calling these phrases declarative. The fact that they are declarative normally wouldn't make any difference. You would just be showing off vocabulary for the sake of it. But here it does make a difference because her certainty is guaranteed to infuriate the audience. So the fact that these sentences are so declarative is a method, is a point worth making. Let's read. But the need to truly follow the inspector's message is emphasised by the construct of Mrs. Birling, who plays a significant role in Eva's two deaths. By structurally placing Mrs. Birling last in the order of events, Priestley is placing the most blame on Mrs. Birling, since she had the final opportunity to prevent Eva's death. The short declarative phrases of "I don't believe it" and "I won't believe it" infuriate the audience, since the short declarative nature of the phrases suggest a finality to her thinking, where she is unwilling to change and entertain the prospect of Eric's involvement in this scandal. The short phrases perhaps, and there's that exploratory vocabulary again, reflect her inability to dwell on this prospect, and they allude to the notion of Mrs. Birling being willfully blind to the situation. Again, Adam is using the principle of having a quotation in every single paragraph. You'll have noticed all the way through how they're embedded into the sentences, and hopefully you can see how much detail there is in linking the interpretation of the quotation to Priestley's purpose. Now, this was Adam's original conclusion. I'm going to show you my addition to it at the end to make it an 100% answer. But let's see how he explains the willful blindness of Sybil Birling and links that to Priestley's purpose. With the curtain closing at this exact moment, there's another structural feature. Perhaps Priestley forces the audience to see Sybil Birling's link to the Sibyls. Perhaps the name Sybil derives from the ancient Greek prophetesses, Sibyls. Perhaps Priestley highlights the irony to Mrs. Birling's character to suggest how much better of an influence Mrs. Birling could have acted through the funds of her charity if she behaved as her namesake suggested. Therefore, Priestley at the end of Act 2 builds up an accusation of the upper-class older generation who are unwilling to recognise the need for societal change, despite having the power to do so. So this is a sophisticated idea, and Adam ideally would link that to the power the audience now has to change society with the 1945 election. Adam has taken this idea from my SYBIL Birling video, and he could have developed it even more cunningly by linking this to the idea of the play being a tragedy. In Greek tragic theatre, there's always a prophecy about the main character's fate, and the main character tries to avoid their fate, which leads to the eventual tragedy. Now, if we jump into AO1, you need to respond to the whole of the text. And the easiest way to do that is always, no matter what the essay, write about the ending. So this conclusion I'm going to offer you will fit any essay you get because it's an interpretation of the ending. The final telephone call, which ends the play, emphasises that the older generation still hold political and social power. Sheila and Eric, representing the younger generation, have learned the inspector's socialist and Christian message, but because their parents still control the levers of power, this is not enough. Another working class woman has taken her life. This is a cycle Priestley wants the audience to break in choosing a socialist future in 1945. So notice I've come back to Priestley's purpose. I've gone back to the idea of the socialist message being the same as the Christian message that I introduced earlier in the essay. And I've come back to the conflict between Sheila and Eric and their parents that the question invited me to think about at the beginning. Because I've written about the ending, I have responded to the whole text. In total, that essay is now 885 words. That is doable in a 45-minute exam. And 800 to 1,000 words is typical of students who write grade 9 essays under exam conditions. The most popular question that examiners ask on an inspector calls is about Sheila, and if you would like to find out the 7 skills of writing a grade 9 essay, the one appearing here is also about Sheila. So why not kill 2 birds with 1 stone? Head on over there now.